Good morning, Coldwell Banker George Realty. Thank you for attending. We're going to have a little refresher over the grid section of the RPA and some activities that a buyer's agent, once they're in escrow, should be doing. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going. Good morning, Peter.
Oh, good
Can
morning, Michelle.
you
Yes.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right, everybody. Peter Cam is here. So if he has any things to add to the training, he's going to jump in. And we're going to get going on the grid section.
We can find these training documents in the Zip Form Plus.
Yes, and if you need a set of them after the meeting, I'm happy to email them to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's some auto-populated forms that come in, and we're doing a residential purchase agreement today. So I've put the auto-populated forms up front. So as you know, we always have to have an agency disclosure, and this outlines our duties as an agent to our clients, and it's used for seller agent and buyer's agent. So I think you would all be pretty familiar with this. You have your buyer sign and date this. Since we're talking about an offer, I'm probably going to use buyer. Buyer, fill this out completely with license numbers and have them sign that at the top of the offer, okay? So these are auto-populated forms. This buyer's investigation advisory is also going to auto-populate at the back of your offer. So this is a good form because it tells them, to go ahead and get inspections and things of that nature. So these I'm just going to scroll through quickly because what we're really going to be doing is the grid section. The Fair Appraisal Act addendum does auto-populate. However, when they make the contract changes on, I believe it's going to be the 25th, this particular form will be embedded into the contract. I believe it's going to be paragraph 29. But at any rate, it'll still be there. It'll just be embedded into the RPA. And the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory auto-populates as well. Fair housing and discrimination advisory will auto-populate. And we're going to get to the grid section. Possible representation of more than one seller and wire fraud. Buyer's home inspection advisory. So here's what we're going to be going over today. How do I get rid of this? I can't see.
So obviously they auto-populate once you enter some type of information, correct?
They auto-populate when you pull up the RPA through the zip forms. So if you pull up an RPA and you're going to start typing, those forms will already be there.
Perfect.
With the data. So this is the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. I want to mention that as we know, there's going to be some changes to this. So not to worry, we've got you covered. On June 26th, we're going to have a training on any of the changes and the NAR settlement documents that'll be coming in regarding commission. We will have a live training and we're hoping that you show up in person. We'll probably do a little breakfast snacks and things of that nature. So today we're going to be strictly going over the grid. So you fill out the date you're preparing this offer. This is an offer from the buyer's name and the address, and then you insert also the APN number. Okay. So here is the agency. This is really important to be filled out properly with the brokerage firm, their license number, the seller's agent, their license number, and the appropriate check. Are they representing the seller or are they dual? Are they representing both the buyer and seller? Same thing down here. Now, if it's Coldwell Banker George here and Remax or another brokerage here, that is separate. They're the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. But if this both said Coldwell Banker George Realty, then we are dual regardless of if it's a different agent in our brokerage. So if this was not filled out correctly, listing agents, if you noticed it, maybe there was a transposition on the license numbers, you're going to need to flow back an agency confirmation form. And I would do it right in your counteroffer to the buyer's agent and have everybody sign that to correct it, then you're good to go. Okay. So when you look at this grid, at first when they changed everything, I wasn't real happy, but now I really love it because all of your terms are mostly up top. And they've made it really easy with references. So if you were countering, let's say one of these terms here, listing agents, you would counter it as 3A purchase price or 3D1 initial deposit. These paragraphs here correspond to the item they're listing here. So if you want to read more about the purchase price, you would go to 5 and then 5B, okay? So I think it's really laid out nice for us. So on A, the purchase price, insert your purchase price. If it is all cash, click the box. Close of escrow, check the box, insert the days, or if your buyer prefers a certain date, check the box and insert the date here. If it falls on a weekend or a holiday, it will move to the next day to close. So the expiration of offer is right up top. You can leave it at the default 3 calendar days after buyer's signature at 5 p.m. Or if you think it's a property that there's multiple offers and they may need a little bit of time to look at all of the offers, you can extend this time here and make your offer valid until a different date. You don't have to use the fallout. So that's up to you and what you think is going on, or if you want to, your buyer wants a quick answer, you could leave it at the fallout. Initial deposit. So in residential, the initial deposit is negotiable. However, most listing agents are going to counter to 3%. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Because that's the liquidated damage amount. So if you're a listing agent and they've only put in 1 or 2%, generally you're going to counter that back to 3% because you want to have the initial deposit to match the liquidated damage amount if it's initialed. So 3%. And I just want to remind everybody that that's on residential only. That doesn't pertain to commercial, okay? So commercial does not have that 3% cap. So you have this section here, the initial deposit will be the only place in the contract that is business days. The rest are going to be calendar days. However, to get the initial deposit in, you have 3 business days, and it's already for wire transfer. Now you could put a different method here, but that is up to escrow if they want to accept that method of payment. Maybe you want to bring in a cashier's check or something like that. That would be up to escrow. So if escrow does not accept your secondary method here, it would revert back to wire transfer, okay? So there's a form if you're going to increase the deposit. It's called a delivery of increased deposit. So let's say here there was only 2%, and then they're going to increase it 1 more percent here by bringing in another % of the initial deposit. You want to make sure and be in the habit of always attaching the increased deposit, the DID. And the reason why is because let's say this was below 3%. Once you bring it in on this form, you are making it part of the liquidated damages, okay? So upon removal of contingencies is the default or the date. Mostly in residential, I don't see this being used, but I just wanted to briefly touch on it, okay? Usually the full 3% is coming in. So the loan amount, you put your first here and it'll auto-populate what the percentage of the purchase price is. It defaults to a commercial, to a conventional loan. And, or you may check FHA, VA, seller financing or other. points, the buyer pays up to how many points. So if you are working with your buyer, make sure you're talking to the lender to have the exact amount of points that you need, and put that in. It does default to a fixed rate loan. If it's an adjustable rate, you need to put the percentage of the adjustable, that the percentage not to exceed. So if FHA or VA is checked, you deliver a list of lender required repairs, and you have 17 days to do that. I think they put that up top because you check here and certain forms populate. So I'll stop right here because FHA and VA, you can handle the lender requested repairs right on the RR. They have a section for it. It's very easy to use. So just be aware of that. FHA and VA, I have closed not a lot, but a couple of both. And what they're normally looking for is safety issues and things like if you have chipping paint around your windowsills. One time I had to have a garage door painted because there was chipping paint around it. So things like that, broken windows, they're going to look for safety issues, and you can handle the lender required repairs on a request for repair to the seller. Now, that brings me to another point. Does the seller have to accept those repairs required by the lender? Technically, no. However, maybe it's a property that didn't get a lot of activity. They may want to consider that and, make the repairs and get it ready for sale, because sometimes if there's a lot of activity, then maybe you don't deal with it and you just say you're not going to repair it. However, if there's not, then you probably want to talk to them about getting the items done. But at any rate, that's what this pertains to. Once you check that you have this kind of loan, there it will populate this form here, FVAC. Okay. Additional financed amount. If you have an additional financed amount, you're going to insert it here. It does default to conventional. And as I said, normally this is not going to pertain. I have not seen a lot of it in residential. I've seen this used more in commercial. So the occupancy type here is defaulting to primary. If it's the secondary home or investment, you would check the appropriate box. This will auto calculate for you. You don't need to do that. Okay. So on Q1, seller credit, if any, to buyer, you would insert the amount here. And it automatically defaults to that it's going to be applied to the closing costs. So if you are seeking a credit, not just on this, but if later when you're negotiating repairs, check with the lender, because you need to make sure that the amount you're requesting will be approved by the lender. Because if you get to the closing table and let's say you negotiated a credit in lieu of repairs for $10,000 and the lender will only accept $8,000, that's all they're going to get at that closing table, and they wouldn't be happy. So you can structure it differently. If you call the lender and they say 10,000 credit is fine, great. But if they say it's not, perhaps you could ask for a $2,000 price reduction and then take the rest in credit. So just be aware when you're asking for seller credits to the buyer, whether you're asking up front or when you are negotiating your repairs, that you check with the lender first. It's probably going to be okay, but you need to make sure you don't want to leave any money on the table because you didn't ask the question to the lender, okay? So seller agrees to pay obligation to compensate buyer's broker. If that's the case, check here. I know we have a lot of changes coming up. I'm not going to go over those today with the NAR settlement. We will be running a extensive training on that at the end of the month. And in between them, Peter Cam will be briefing at our Monday morning, a couple of our Monday morning meetings. So I'm going to leave that until the end of the month, and Peter will be briefing on that at our Monday morning meetings, 2 of them. So verification of all cash, you should attach it to the offer. It makes you a lot stronger, but if they don't have it, you would check the box for 3 days that it defaults for, or insert the days, but recommend that that is attached to the offer, especially because you're all cash, they want to make sure, okay? Verification of down payment and closing costs, you can attach it to the offer. Verification of loan application, do you have a pre-call, a pre-approval, fully underwritten pre-approval? Make sure you're attaching these. Although they give you a box to check that'll be after the offer, it's just a stronger offer if you can get those attached, okay? So the final verification of condition, so that would be the VP form. You have 5 days prior to close, or you can amend that to put some additional days in. So the VP seems like it's, sometimes we don't think of it as a big deal, but the things that I like to do when we're going to verify is you want to make sure that prior to going to that final verification of condition of the property, that if you have negotiated repairs that the seller's going to make, please have all the receipts. Ask the listing agent to provide those to you, invoices, material receipts, anything that they've done to repair the property. Let's go ahead and get those receipts so that you have them for your buyer. So when we go to our final verification of condition, we're going to be looking for the repairs that are made. Now, we're not going to be climbing on the roof or climbing in the attic, but prior to this, you would have sent an email, you know, even though they signed the request for repair and agreed to do it, you're going to send an email so that you have it in writing to the listing agent, just confirming that all repairs outlined on the request for repair have been completed. And you're going to ask for receipts so that you have that in writing. So when you're there, you're going to look to make sure that as much as you can visibly see without, like I said, climbing in places, that the repairs have been done, that you have appropriate documentation that has been done. And also, if you wrote in for refrigerator, washer, dryer, things of that nature, make sure that you are looking that those items have been left on the property and are there. And so it's, you know, there's things to do on this final verification. And so those are items that I'm always going to be looking for. And if the buyer cannot make it, we need to waive the verification on a checkbox on the VP form that everybody signs. They cannot send somebody other than the buyer because it is for the buyer's verification process. However, if the buyer couldn't make it, I would, as an agent, probably still go over there and look to make sure of the items are there or things were done as I just outlined, because you want to make it as clean as possible. The other thing you're going to look for when you're there is that there's no debris left on the property and there's no like paint or, you know, things that's hard to get rid of left in the garage. I always take a spin and look for that because that costs money to remove them. And I have had that happen. And on the very last day, we've had to give a credit so that the buyer could hire somebody to, you know, remove the items. So make sure that you are speaking with the listing agent if you're representing the buyer, that the property will be free of debris. And as a listing agent, make sure that you are preparing your client to have everything cleared out and not left on the property unless it's agreed to in writing. So an assignment request, I like that they put this as a contingency 17 days after acceptance. If there's going to be an assignment for the buyer, then you must do it within 17 days after acceptance, and it refers you to the paragraph to read about that. So here's your contingencies. The loan, you have 17 days after acceptance or no loan contingency if you're a cash buyer. Appraisal, you have 17 days after acceptance. Now, even if you're a cash buyer, you can still have an appraisal contingency. Or you can have no appraisal contingency depending on how aggressive you feel the buyer feels they need to be with the property to get accepted. And this space here, so let's say we had a $700,000 purchase agreement that we offered, and you want to click this and put 650 here. So what that's saying is, if that property appraises at 650 or higher, you're still a go. That means that the buyer would have to come up with that gap, that $50,000 gap. So I normally don't see this filled out, but I just wanted to call your attention to what that is. So investigation of property. This is where you're going to go and do your home inspection. If you need a roof inspection, termite inspection, make sure that you're doing all of those inspections during this contingency period. And if a listing agent has come back and cut these, when you get the counter back, make sure that you can get your team out there in the amount of time. And that also goes for the loan. You want to check with your lender to make sure that they can, if these days have been cut down, and even 17 days, just check with the lender to make sure that they can operate within these timeframes, okay? So informational access to property, that's a buyer's right to access the property for informational purposes. So what could that be? Maybe they want to measure a wall. Maybe they want to have a contractor over with them to look at the bathroom they're going to remodel. So it's just informational access to the property. It does not create cancellation rights, or is it a contingency? So these days you kind of want to make a match, because if this investigation of a property was at 10 and this is at 17, maybe the seller wouldn't be comfortable with them keep coming back. So I always like to match these, whatever it is, match them. So that's just so they can measure, figure out what they're going to do with the property, or any other things that they want to check and things like that. Review of seller's documents. You have 17 days after acceptance to have those reviewed, or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So as listing agents, we never want to deliver late because we don't want to be adding more contingency days. So it's good to have those done right up front. Preliminary title report, 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery. So if you're a listing agent, we always ask that you order the preliminary title report right away before you're even in escrow, because you can be reviewing that and seeing if there's any issues that may pop up and going over it with the title officer. So when I get a preliminary title report, I take my highlighter, I review it by myself, and then I look at the front page. Will have the title officer's name and phone number on it. So even if I haven't noted anything, I'm going to call that title officer and say, hey, I've looked at the preliminary title report. I don't notice anything. Is there anything I should be paying attention to, or that you're going to need documentation for? So if you can do that step up front, it helps a lot, because then you're not delaying and there's something on the prelim that nobody knew about. I've seen old liens on prelims. I've seen things like old HOAs that were from the 1930s or 40s, things like that. Now, the preliminary title report, when it gets delivered to you, has hyperlinks. And they're blue links where you can click and get the underlining documents. Now, in some, like those old HOAs that are from the 40s, 50s, whatever, they don't have those attached. You need to order those. So a lot of times they're not going to be applicable, but whatever's on that prelim, click those hyperlinks. And buyer's agent, if the listing agent did not send you a hyperlinked title report, you can either ask the listing agent to provide one, or you can go ahead and call the title officer and ask them to send you a hyperlink title report, okay? And so once I've reviewed it myself, check with the title officer, it's good to go. So common interest disclosures. This is your HOA docs. 17 days after acceptance is your review time, or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. And we've had trainings where we've recommended that the listing agents get these very quickly after listing the property, because the HOAs don't follow your time frame or your contingency, and you don't want to make it late. You want to get them out. I'm sorry, I have a cough today, as soon as possible. Okay, so make sure these are ordered right up top. Get those HOA docs out. And review of leased or liened items, solar panels, propane, tanks. You have 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So for instance, if there's solar panels on the property, you're going to give them the contract, any data you have. And there's also a form that CAR made to make it easier with these solar panels, because it can be very confusing from company to company, what's included, what's excluded. Even at payoff, if you pay off solar panels, sometimes you still have to buy the power through that particular company. So those are things that hopefully that solar panel questionnaire should help answer for the buyer. But at any rate, you're going to want to get all of the documentation and things of that nature. And you have 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery. So as a listing agent, if you know that they have leased or lien items on the property, you should be asking for those right away, you know, so that you have them and you can answer any questions. So removal of or waiver of contingencies. You can remove contingencies right at the top with your offer, but if you do, it's against the agent's advice. So if your buyer is insisting on removing contingencies, let that be their idea and not yours. And also make sure that you are explaining to them the ramifications of removing certain contingencies if they do that right up top. Okay, so if this offer is contingent on the sale of a buyer's property, you need to click this and it will populate with the appropriate form. Okay, so if you don't click it, this document, it's not contingent upon the sale. So make sure that if they need to sell a property, that you're clicking this to insert the form. Time of possession, when you get your keys, upon notification of recordation. So you can leave it like that. You can just leave it to the default. So for the keys and the remotes and things like that, I'm finding it much easier to leave it with the escrow officer. Normally we create a, you know, we tag the keys, take a big envelope over to escrow and provide that to the escrow officer a few days before closing, so that when the buyer's agent needs the keys, they're right there for them to pick up. So make sure that you realize that as a listing agent, it's upon recordation. If the seller wanted to stay in the property, let's say close of escrow +3, you're going to need to check the box here. Even if it's 1 day, you're going to provide a CAR form, SIP, seller in possession form. If it's, or click this box, if this is 30 days or more, you're going to need to create a residential lease agreement after the sale. So make sure you're paying attention here, listing agents. And if your seller wants to stay in, make sure that you are countering that, even if it's COE +1 day, because the default on this is the upon notice of recordation. So occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller, you're going to check this box. Now, you might not know this writing an offer, because this will pertain to anybody that's an adult, that's not on title, 18 years plus. And even if it's an aunt or an uncle staying in a bedroom for free, you still need to attach the TOPA to let people know. You may not know this at the onset of your offer, but when you find it out, if there's somebody there, then ask them to provide you a TOPA, okay? So seller delivery of documents, so all of the disclosures that the seller needs to provide, they need to do it within seven days. Or if that's, if they already have all the disclosures and they want to turn it over sooner, they can. You can amend the days here. There's also sign and return escrow holder provisions. So I like that they put a fuse on this for 5 days after delivery, because sometimes, you know, in the past I've seen where people just drag it and they don't sign these right away. So it's nice that they have a contractual obligation for you to sign those. So time to pay fees for ordering your HOA documents 3 days after acceptance. Again, I'm going to say we should have these at the listing. I know it costs money, but the seller's serious about selling, so we should get those documents right away. Ask them to provide the funds for those and get those, so there's no a stall in your contingency periods. Installation of smoke alarms, CO detector, water heater bracing, 17 days, 7 days after acceptance. You want to make sure that these are done because this is one of the items that the appraiser will look for. And if the seller has agreed to these costs, you'll see it in the chart below. It's usually a seller's cost because they have access to the property and can easily do this. It can be negotiated, but most contracts I see it as a seller's obligation, but you can check it to the buyer. If you don't have this done and you cause a reinspection from the appraiser, then it is going to be a fee that will be charged to the seller. So make sure that these are done. In the past, I used to carry extra smokes and stuff like that in my car. So just make sure that you're prepping the seller to have this done as listing agents, and as buyer's agents, make sure you're looking at this, okay? So we are in items included and excluded section. So this is a really important section. So I would recommend that everybody read paragraph 9 of this contract, because there's a lot of items included automatically in the contract. So you want to make sure that you're going over that section with your seller and buyers. Make sure you understand what is included if they have not excluded it. So if you need to check boxes here for the refrigerator, the stove, washer and dryer, or if there's other things, maybe there's a giant potted plant on the porch that the buyers would like to keep, you can ask for it and see what they say. So this is an important section, but most importantly, make sure that you're reading paragraph 9. I'm kind of amazed by some of the stuff that's included, so I do periodically reread that. If there's excluded items, probably as you're writing an offer, you wouldn't know, but listing agents, make sure that you are providing those items that the seller does not wish to leave behind. Make sure you're excluding them on your counter offer. Okay. Natural hazard disclosure report. This is a civil code requirement, not the because of some of the items in there that are contained in that report that we need to provide the buyer. So it's nice that a third party does that for us. So normally a seller's going to pay, but again, it's all negotiable. So if I'm writing an offer for my client, I'm a buyer's agent, I'm going to check seller. I'm going to check for environmental because I want to get that additional information. There's already going to be tax information in the natural hazard disclosure report, but I'm going to check to get a little bit more information here. And I'm probably going to want to use my own natural hazard company, or you can say seller's preference, but I would check here, put my natural hazards company there, and always put the representative's name that you're working with, because you want them to get credit if that was your intention, okay? So my recommendation is to always check for environmental. So Q2 Here, what I've seen it mostly used for is termite report. So termite report, and then they check the buyer or seller provided by here. Now, if you have a cash deal, it's, you know, it's okay to add it, or I'm sorry, right here, Q3, add it. But if it's gonna go to a lender, you may want to think about it because that termite report will need to be provided to the lender. You can handle the termite report and clearances with an RR, but I'll leave that up to you. You can ask your own lender. But if I'm a cash buyer, I will put it here. And if I want section 1 termite report, section 1 clearance, I'm going to check it to the seller. Now, usually the seller, if they don't have the report, that's a blank check because they don't know the amount. So I always recommend as a seller, they not just blindly okay that because we don't know the amount. If they don't already have a termite report, I would be careful of that. At any rate, you can handle this in the request for repair. That's why at the onset, I said, bring the home inspector, get the termite company over there. I like to handle this in there. If I have a loan, I don't want to provide the termite report to the lender generally, okay? So smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heater, brazing here. This is going to say who's going to do that. So normally it's going to be a seller because they have access to the property already. Okay. So I always would check to the seller, and I'm always telling the seller ahead of time to please make sure these items are done. Government required point of sale inspection and reports. Generally, I would check that to the seller. That means if there's a for instance, City of San Marino has reports that are required at point of sale, and there's a list of other cities like the 9A for LA. So you want to check that to the seller. And what if there's corrective or remedial actions required from those reports? You want to check that to the seller. If you're representing the buyer, you may get countered back, but at that point, you can have a discussion with your buyer. Going out the gate, I would always check these to the seller. Excuse me, escrow fees. So you have the choice of buyer, seller, both, each to pay their own fees. So both would not be right because there's customary fees that they each pay. So I don't want a 50-50 split. I want it as the customary fees. So I'm only going to check this box. If I have, if I want to write in for an escrow holder, I'm going to write the escrow company's name, comma, and the officer, because if you send this and they accept that and the listing agent knows another officer in that company, they may assign it to their own officer because you didn't specify an escrow officer. So when you add an escrow holder, always put the escrow officer as well. Title insurance. That's usually the seller. You're going to check here. As I said, though, everything's negotiable, but check if I'm representing the buyer, I'm going to check here. And most sellers agents, listing agents, that's going to be fine with them. You either put seller's preference here or your title company, comma, whoever your representative is, your title rep, because you want to make sure that they have credit for that. Okay. Buyer's lender's title, that falls to the buyer. It's already stipulated. The tax and fees, county transfer, city tax, check to the seller is usually customary. So, but everything's negotiable. But if you're representing a buyer, you're normally going to check these boxes, and usually the listing agent will let that go through that way. HOA fee for preparing the disclosures is the seller. And if the buyer needs a certification letter, or that would be their fee. HOA transfer fees. Unless otherwise agreed, the seller pays for separate HOA move out fee. Sometimes they have move out fees. And there's move-in fees, so the seller would pay for the move-out, the buyer would pay for the move-in. If there are transfer fees associated with that HOA, you would also check it to the seller, is my advice. Private transfer fees, that is already defaulted to the seller. I would leave that as it is. On Q16 is where you would insert the CBGR compliance fee, which is $295. So you would insert that right here, type that in. And then the home warranty plan chosen by the buyer, that's really important. Let the buyer choose their own plan. You can give them some, recommendations, but let them choose their plan. We can get pamphlets from the home warranty. We have them around the office. You could certainly call and they'll give it to them or things like that. But normally you're going to ask the seller. Sometimes the seller will or will not, but I think a home warranty plan is really important. And you're going to talk to your home warranty rep and tell them about the property of his SFR condo townhome and ask them what the plan name is. And I would put the name of the plan here. I would put the cost not to exceed. You need to put that because the seller's not going to leave a blank check. So put the cost not to exceed, who it will be issued by, and again, who is the representative that you wish to have credit on that. Now, if the buyer's saying, hey, I want to not put that in the offer, I'm going to waive it because they feel like it makes them stronger, they can waive it. I don't recommend it. We don't recommend it, but they can, and maybe that could be purchased through escrow, okay? Or I think there's a few days after close of escrow that you can still purchase a home warranty plan. But at any rate, we always recommend that you go out with one because if something happened a week later that could have been covered by a home warranty plan, you want to make sure you're providing that. So I want to drop down to paragraph 9 because I just think it's so important. So here's the items included in the sale. So you have ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, the gas logs, the grates, all of this. I really recommend that you read it so you understand what is included. They've even included light bulbs, including smart light bulbs. So drapery needs to be left. I did have a sale once where they took out all the rods in the drapery and the buyers were in love with that. So we had to get that back, into the property. So make sure listing agents and buyer's agents that you're understanding what is included in the sale so that you know what should be left there, and listing agents. So if there's something that you need to exclude, make sure you're reading this paragraph. Okay, so that concludes our grid section refresher course. Do we have any questions? Okay.
Well, if there any, there is no questions from the audience, I would like to comment a little bit on the today's session. Michelle did a very, very good job in going through the grids, and it's very comprehensive. And it is very, very essential that you go through each item methodically. And most of the agents tend to just leave or most of the boxes blank, and that was a big mistake because a lot of them, even though if you leave it blank, it will go to default. But most of the default, especially for the time for performance, is pretty standard. It's very short, and you sometimes a lot of time, most of the time, you want more time. For example, for the loan contingency and for the for appraisal contingency, you would like to have more time. So you have to better check the boxes that to your client's liking, because you have to talk to your clients, ask them how much time they need to go with the lender, and how much time they need for the loan contingency. So that's very important because but those are very, very critical contingency, and you do not want to remove those contingency lightly, especially for the loan contingency. Sometimes they drag on for a long time because the lender is not sure that whether they get all the required documents or information that they need. So, and also, don't remove the loan contingency until you're absolutely sure, okay? Because once you remove it, you don't have any excuse not to perform. And at the end, then you have a big dispute with the seller, and then you don't want to do that, okay? And another thing is the excluded items in the grid. Those are very important. You think that whatever is attached to the house will be excluded, but it's not necessary. They will. I mean, that will be included, but it's not necessary because sometimes you have a very expensive chandelier that you want to exclude it, and you save it for the seller, and the seller forgot to check it as the exclude item, and at the end there will be dispute. And also for the statues, at one time we had a big problem with the buyer, because the buyer thought that the statue will remain, but long behold, the seller was very fond of the statue, and the statue are movable too, so in other words, it can be easily detached. So he himself thinks that those statues are excluded, but in fact, the buyer thought it would be included because they would sit down on in the garden, and there was a stationery. So those excluded items are very, very critical, and you have to be very careful. The last items that I want to mention is about the solar panel. Okay, the solar panel, you should have a separate disclosure for the solar panel, because most of the solar panel, they have a lease, and the lease is has a lien on the property. In other words, once the property is transferred, the lien still remains with the property, and the buyer is supposed to be obligated to pay off the amount until it's fully paid. And sometimes the buyer didn't know that, and sometimes the buyer doesn't want to have the solar panel, and he wants the seller to pay for everything before it's transferred to the buyers. So those issue has to be settled very early in the game. The earlier the earlier as possible, the better. So those are very, very critical. So, but other than that, you just go through the grid methodically, each one by one, and you have a pretty good idea of what you're getting into for your client. Okay, so those are my comments.
Thank you, Peter. I have a question.
Yes, Sylvia.
Regarding what you just mentioned about the chandelier. So let's say you go to an open house and you see this chandelier, and it really, as a buyer, you loved it and you submit the offer, and then later they remove it. What happens then? Should they have disclosed it before when they have the open house that's removable? Because normally anything attached will stay.
Yeah, that will be the point of contention for both parties, because yeah, that's example of ambiguity. So one party think that it was attached to the house, so it should be included, right? But the seller thinks that, wow, it's such an expensive item, very unique item, so I can remove it and then substitute it with another chandelier. So it is essential for both parties to make sure have a prior disclosure or declarations that which items are excluded and which one are not.
Okay, so I'd say I would think that at the time, this is my thought. I would think that at the time of the listing, on the excluded items, that would be listed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Ideally, that would be that way, yes.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Peter, I have a comment. If they, like what we're talking about, even if they've listed it in the comments in the MLS that these are included, you can't use that. It has to be
No,
in the
you cannot.
contract. It has to
Right,
be
right,
in the contract.
It has
So
to be
make
in the
sure
contract.
you're paying
Exactly.
attention. Yeah.
Good point. Mhm.
And if they've excluded something on the MLS and you notice it in the private remarks and you want a strong offer, go ahead and exclude that for them because they're not going to, let that go. If it's, there's certain strategies to that to make less counterpoints. So that would be up to you and the buyer.
Right. Good point.
One thing I neglected to mention is, and I think it's important, FHA, VA, they get to keep their appraisal contingency until close of escrow. So just be aware of that. I have closed those types of deals, but you need to be aware that their appraisal contingency shall remain in effect. And you can read the CAR form FBAC about that. So just be aware that appraisal contingency remains in effect. If the property appraises lower than the offer price, of course, the buyer can elect to go through with it or not. Okay, so just as a precaution that that, read FBAC. Okay.
What was your email again? Do you have an email?
Myself?
Yes.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat. Any other questions for Peter?
That's it.
Jimmy.
Sorry, Peter.
That's okay, Jimmy.
If you guys Peter, do you have anything else?
No, I'm fine. I'm
Okay.
good. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, my chat box is frozen. So my email is MOLSEN, the initials of our firm, molsencbgr@gmail.com. Okay. So Peter will take us off for the weekend. Go ahead, Peter.
All right. See you, everybody. Have a nice weekend and happy Father's Day.
Happy
right.
Father's Day to all the fathers
Okay.
out there.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. We'll see you
Bye.
again
Thank you.
soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good, good.